And now we'd like to welcome Jen Yeaw and Dmitri Pikman to the latest episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. Jen and Dmitri, thank you so much for joining myself and Finn on this episode.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
having us.
having us.
We are breaking some new ground today. This is the first episode where we have two guests on, so Finn and I are super excited to have both of you to talk immigration and so much more. But before we get into the meat of our conversations, Finn and I always just like to get to know our guests a little bit more, as well as our listeners. So. Um, Jen, can you tell us just a little bit more about your career and how you got started as an immigration attorney?
Yeah. So I've been an immigration attorney, primarily business immigration, for between 7 and 8 years now. I went to law school later in life. This is a second career for me. I was a social worker for many years. I worked for a major healthcare hospital here. I'm in North Carolina, here in North Carolina, and we had an immigrant population. It was a public hospital. And while I was in law school, we actually were contracting with some immigration attorneys to kind of help us with some of the immigration issues for our patients. And that's honestly how I learned at all about immigration law. I was and just got involved with it in through that way. And then when I graduated, I slowly started taking on immigration work until I transitioned from social work to law full time. So, yeah.
That's an awesome story. Thank you so much. And Dimitri, how about you? How did you get started in immigration?
Yeah, thank you. So similar to Jen, in the amount of years I've been practicing for about 8+ years, and I went to law school, really set on immigration. I'm an immigrant myself. That's what I wanted to do. And then, obviously, as it happens, and Jen can attest to that, you graduate from law school and it just kind of never works out the way you plan. So I ended up doing eviction defense at a nonprofit. Very rewarding career, a little bit high stress, but still kind of my heart was set on immigration, so I was keeping an ear out. And then a friend of mine mentioned this role opening up in business immigration, which I, again, like Jen, had kind of no idea what that was at the time. I had to do a little bit of research, but I applied, and as they say, the rest is history. I think the field of business immigration really works well with my personality, with kind of my approach. I also do some family immigration as well as it comes up, and get to help people, give a little bit back as well. So it's nice.
Yeah, awesome. We're super excited to talk to you both today. And obviously, the theme of this podcast is the crossover between what is being celebrated in the month of June, which is Pride Month and Immigrant Heritage Month.
Hmm.
You both, we were talking before we started recording, you both got into immigration law around 2015, which was a big year for the LGBTQIA movement with Obergefell, and also a big year in immigration law because it was the year before the Trump administration came into office and flipped U.S. immigration policy on its head. Can you both talk maybe a little bit about what that experience was like coming into the world of employment-based immigration law during that time? Dmitri, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, as I said, I kind of got into business immigration on the advice of a friend, and part of the way in which he described the field to me was, hey, a lot less stress than what you're doing now with eviction defense. There's almost 100% approval rate of cases. It's going to be kind of a lot less intense for you on a day-to-day basis. And I got into the field, and as you mentioned, very soon things drastically changed. And whereas before we saw almost 100% approval rate for cases, we suddenly were seeing a lot more pushback without much rhyme or reason, to be honest. We would see the exact same case, and while it was getting approved prior to the Trump administration, we would see a denial or pushback, quite substantial pushback for cases. What we've been hearing, of course, is that there were kind of internal quotas in place. Officers were really pushed to deny cases or to push back on cases. They were getting questioned if they were, quote unquote, approving too many cases, so to speak. So it was really challenging time in immigration. It was a good learning experience, I have to say. I was pretty new to the field at the time, so kind of having to fight for every case and having to really prove why, the folks that I were applying for, why they actually qualified for the benefits was again a good learning experience, but a little bit stressful for my first few years in immigration.
Yeah, similarly, I yeah, transitioned into it. Um, I was working for a really small boutique practice when I first started full time, like as a full time attorney. And we did primarily healthcare business immigration, so a lot of doctors, nurses. And then I went from that really small firm to a huge firm, like a massive immigration group, where we were working on like huge clients. And all of a sudden, like Dmitri said, we were getting a lot more denials than anybody had ever seen before. You know, the very seasoned immigration attorneys who'd been practicing for 20 years had never experienced this level of pushback from the government before. Um, so it was difficult. And, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of cases when you work for a huge firm that has a huge immigration practice group. Um, and for every case that you touch, it's a human being's life that is turned upside down. I think a lot of people, we practice primarily business immigration. We might do a little bit of asylum, a little bit of family. A lot of people think our clients are corporations, and so it's like not humanized. But for every case we file, there's a human being on the other side of it. And so it was extremely anxiety ridden time, not only for us, but all of our clients and all the employees working for those clients. I kind of joke, my background's in social work, and I kind of joke, but not joke, that I was doing way more therapy when I became an attorney than I was before as a social worker. So yeah, really stressful. But like Dmitri said, I agree. It was a great learning experience, very difficult, but a great learning experience. We got a lot of exposure to a lot of case types that we would have never seen before. A lot of arguing, which is what you go to law school because you're like, I'm going to argue stuff.
Yeah.
But I think I was doing an asylum case. I started an asylum case back then too, and I kind of saw the immediate impact on that case, which was essentially stopped when the new administration came in 2016, because there was such kind of vitriol against immigrants of any kind. So very different.
How did the asylum case end up progressing?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because it's definitely an intersection of kind of what we're talking about today. I was volunteering my time with an organization called Immigration Equality, which is based in New York. They do specifically asylum and refugee cases for the LGBTQ community, and those that are impacted by AIDS. So I was working with a gentleman. My client was a gentleman from Jamaica who had come to the U.S. And what's interesting about it is, like, I don't think people think of Jamaica as an extremely homophobic place, but it is extremely. And when I first took the case, I was a young attorney, and they were like, it's probably going to take 1 to 2 years to go through the whole process. And at the time, I was thinking 2 years. But we filed the case and got my client kind of settled and got him a work authorization. And then essentially you wait until you get called for an interview. And we waited 5 years for that interview. As soon as the transition, the administration changed, essentially we were kind of underground told nothing is going to happen with this case, because it was a very strong case. In meeting all the regulations for asylum, I think it would have been very difficult to deny the case. And so it essentially sat we got the approval 6 years later. Interestingly enough, about a month after Biden was inaugurated, we got the approval. And I just picture like this, it was sitting on someone's desk, and as soon as that inauguration was over, they were just like stamping approved on things that they couldn't approve before. But my client got asylum. Thank God, he's okay. He's here in the United States, safe. So yeah.
That's wonderful to hear.
Hmm.
And Jennifer and Dmitri, so as Vince mentioned, 2015. Then we have the Trump administration years, 2017 to early 2021. Now we're almost halfway through the Biden administration. Can you talk more about the difference between the Biden administration's immigration policies compared to the Trump administration's?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in, Jen. So definitely a marked difference in the way that folks who want to come to the US are treated. From the obvious, just higher approval rates. There's a lot more consistency, which is really nice for a practicing attorney. We know that if a case is strong in our estimation, it most likely will get approved. We're not going to see any surprises, and we know exactly what the government is looking for. They are letting us know they're transparent on what the criteria is for every case. And then just maybe the not so obvious and just the terminology, the language used around immigration, right? Kind of the way that folks are referred to when they're coming to the US. The folks just, since we're on the topic, USCIS announced recently that they're going to respect people preferred gender, that on the forms you can note the gender that you go by versus the gender that's on your documents if they have not been updated. That's a huge milestone. That is a huge, huge difference in just showing how the US government is respecting folks, respecting their gender identities, respecting their, being immigrants. So huge, huge change from that perspective. Just easier work because of the consistency, because of the higher approval rate. Yeah, Jen, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I think a little bit more predictability, or maybe a little bit more. We have a little bit more ability to tell our clients what is likely to happen, which was very difficult with the prior administration because you really couldn't say that. But yeah, I agree with Dimitri. Kind of more consistency, a little bit more positivity, more support of the immigrant community in a lot of ways. Now, I mean, is it perfect? No. I mean, every day in the news, there's something about immigration and kind of the crisis at the border, and um, Biden is, kind of being, talked about right now because of a kind of a new updated asylum ban of sorts. That's like heavily controversial. And I think inherently immigration is a controversial topic now, a lot, because a lot more than it ever was, I think, so publicly before. But I think a lot more people are really more aware, which is good. So yeah, it's not perfect, but certainly more consistent than the previous 4 years.
So I don't think it's often highlighted how important the concept of marriage is in the U.S. immigration system. I mean, we have marriage-based visas. Marital status determines sometimes whether or not the spouse of an immigrant is able to work or not. Jen and Dmitri, again, going back to Obergefell in 2015 and the codification of same-sex marriage in the U.S., how did that change the experience of immigrants generally in the U.S.? And if you have any anecdotal stories from clients you've worked with who saw a change in how they were treated, or the opportunities they were able to achieve through the immigration system because of Obergefell, could you maybe explain some of those? Jen, I'll hand it to you first.
Yeah, I think what an amazing time in history to be present, just generally, whoever you were, for marriage equality to become federal law. I think for me, it was the first time I started having same-sex married clients. and maybe even clients who were willing to say they were gay or kind of felt more comfortable being more transparent about who they were, who their spouse was. Um, but you're absolutely right. It was the first time I started actually having cases with same-sex married couples who were able to sponsor their spouse because they were legally married, or their legal marriage from the country that they were from was now, recognized here in the United States. Um, yeah, it was the first time we were able to get a lot of different benefits that any, heterosexual couple or would have had. Um, I also feel like, you know, immigration, is about people coming to the US. It's the American dream still is a thing, people are coming here for better opportunities. And it's really difficult to come here and still be, kind of um, not be able to be who you really are. And it really kind of freed that up for people. It also freed that up for us too, right? Like I'm married, I have a wife. I got married in 2016 after, Obergefell. I was able to say to my clients and feel more comfortable with my clients, like, hey, here's my wife and I, which maybe wasn't so comfortable before. So, a huge impact, huge. What about you, Dmitri?
Yeah, I can just kind of jump in because, obviously to echo everything that Jen said, and just on a personal level, I'm an immigrant. I was going through my own immigration challenges at that time, and I was in a long-term relationship, but getting married was not an option. So the fact that I was in this long-term relationship would not be kind of visible or accepted in the eyes of the government, which just kind of psychologically really weighs on you. And once that has became an option, it was just like life changing, like Jen said. It's the realization that you are equal, and we're obviously not equal in all the ways as we see in
Right.
the news now, but at least in this one critical way, we are equal, and there is this kind of path forward. And just practically working with my clients, I had to do a little bit of it. My colleagues who started practicing before me had to do a lot of it. We had to get creative. When folks were comfortable enough to disclose they're in a same relationship, you would, try to get them here as like on a tourist visa, because there was not a way to get them here with their spouse, right? So there was all this kind of alternative ways you would try to find that were never, sufficient to give somebody kind of the life here and the long-term ability to stay in the US. That's just this ability to get married and immigrate here with your spouse was really life-changing.
Mm-hmm. Also, to have, I just thought about it now, to have your children recognized as well. I mean, there's a lot around adoption or kind of all different ways you can have children these days. It's much more complicated if you're not from the United States or you're adopting a child that's not from the US or the child was born here, but the parents weren't. Um, so there became a lot more support too. A lot more of these issues came to the forefront that I don't think anybody really had to think about before because it wasn't a priority for them. It didn't impact their lives. So there's a lot of different familial challenges as well that also got more support that we had to create more policies around, more procedures around, um, as a result too. And those are still a work in progress, for sure.
And we hit on it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but obviously, the swing between the Obama administration and the Trump administration, and then back in the Biden administration, in immigration policy the swings were huge, right? Pretty much just showing that the executive branch has an outsized amount of power when it comes to controlling the day-to-day processes of the U.S. immigration system, and that can have negative effects on certain groups, as we've seen. I guess to turn that backdrop into a question, how would you prepare LGBTQIA clients, in the who are going through the immigration process in the U.S. for future swings in immigration policy because of changes in presidential administrations. What advice would you maybe give them on how to approach that uncertainty? Dmitri, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is to never take anything for granted. As you noted, I mean, things can change really quickly, right? We had a Supreme Court decision. Obviously, folks were worried enough to codify it in other ways, but things can always change, and rights that are given can it sounds scary, but can always be taken away. So certainly trying to once, just practically speaking, if you are a U.S. citizen, you have a lot more rights than you do even as a permanent resident. The Muslim travel ban comes into mind. When that was passed, U.S. citizens were accepted, green card holders were not. Then there was a kind of an outcry, and then green card holders were exempted as well. So just kind of the status that you're in would have a really big impact here. So if you want to have a long-term life in the U.S., then certainly moving through your immigration journey, getting to that final stage, attaining your U.S. citizenship, is probably a good path to follow. Just in my own life, I have quite a few friends who've been green card holders for years and years, and kind of were always very lax, did not want to necessarily spend the money to naturalize, become citizens. And then when kind of everything was happening with the Trump administration, and then all the changes, as Jen said, the system obviously isn't perfect. There's still a lot of challenges out there. They've been naturalizing really quickly and going through that process, because just having that consistency is key. So I would say that's probably one thing that I can think of. Think there's anything. I don't know, Jen, if you have anything, and I can jump back in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, strike while the iron's hot. I think the number one thing that we learned, kind of was you cannot prepare for every instance. We have to constantly be educating ourselves about every change that's happening so that we can give appropriate advice, and the best advice that we can give. But yeah, I completely agree. You can't take anything for granted. The immigration process is very long. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of processes. I think with the pandemic, things are taking, the impact of the pandemic has increased processing times extremely. So the only thing we can do is be as efficient as we can, be on top of kind of the legal changes that are ever changing in the immigration landscape, and take advantage of any kind of opening that we see, whether that's a changing in the administration more towards the positive. Like, now is the time, right, before we may have another change in the administration, to get your stuff, get as far as you can in the immigration system in the way that you want to get, if that's towards a green card or naturalizing, or, getting married. I've certainly had clients, employees of clients who were like, I guess we're getting married, because we want to stay here in the US. But taking advantage of the time, the opportunities that arise that are supporting our immigration cases is, the biggest piece of advice that we can give. And our job is to be as efficient as possible, and to stay on top of every change, so that we can tell our clients, like, hey, we're seeing this change, we're seeing this trend, and we really advise you to do this, to take advantage of this wave that we're seeing of whatever that is.
Yeah, I know. Jump in here a little bit too. Just one other thing I thought of is just to get engaged, right? Make sure your voice is heard, whether this is something that's affecting you directly or as an ally. Protest if that's kind of what you feel comfortable with. Call your congressional representative if that's what you feel comfortable with. If you see injustice out there, it sounds a little cliche, but I absolutely believe in it, then, do something about it. Make sure your voice is heard. There's a lot happening right now, both in the immigration sphere and, rights for LGBTQI folks, that things are progressing in one hand and really regressing, terribly regressing in another. So
Hmm.
just making sure that your voice is heard, speaking up, letting folks know you're kind of there, you're supported, I think is vital.
Dimitri and Jen, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you might handle situations. So, Dimitri, as you mentioned, rights are progressing in some states while regressing in others. For employers who are looking to maybe bring a foreign national employee and hire them in a state where maybe they don't feel comfortable, how do you work with that employer and employee to how do you work with them in that type of situation?
Um, I think I think sometimes our job is to be an ear to listen. I mean, we have to work within the federal regulations that govern the immigration system. Um, there are certain steps, one, two, three, four, whatever, certain paperwork that has to be done for whatever visa type that someone's coming in on. We have to follow those rules. We have to do those things correctly. But there is so much anxiety around kind of immigration, whether and moving to the United States, and kind of the image of the United States, interesting right now, is shifting around the world, for so many reasons, whether, it's long-standing rights being suddenly taken away, um, of all kinds, whether it's gun control, whether it's abortion, there's so many topics we could talk about along with gay rights and immigration that intersect with immigration. Um, I think, you know, we can kind of provide time and an ear to talk about those anxieties, talk through kind of planning. But there's only so much we can do versus like, because we have to follow rules and regulations. We have to follow kind of the law. I think sometimes the best thing we can do is provide time to someone to just discuss their anxieties, discuss their stressors, discuss if there is anything we can do, because sometimes you can't, change that situation. Um, but yeah, I think try to be as empathetic as we can to those fears, which are legitimate. You know.
And I'll just add, I mean, this is obviously so much outside of just immigration, you know, companies and employers and folks when they're deciding where they're going to want to do their business, where they're going to live, are of course influenced by what's happening out there, what's in the news. And as Jen was saying, we are, as an attorney, I have to follow the rules here, follow the law, give my clients the best options, and of course, let them make their own decision. And if the decision is I want to move, from this state somewhere else that's a little bit friendlier to my family, then it's certainly something we can help with, and move their visa to a new location, etc. But really, it's giving folks those options, and then at the end, it is of course it will be a personal decision.
What about other countries' immigration systems in the Western world, where maybe there is a bit more emphasis on inclusion of LGBTQIA folks in their laws? What other countries are leading the charge on the inclusion of these folks in their immigration system?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that prior to marriage equality being, legal here in the U.S., folks in same-sex relationships were not necessarily choosing the U.S. as kind of their place to go to or their place to be. Um, and I know we keep repeating it, but yes, things have gotten better, but we're certainly not, the leaders in the world as far as LGBTQI rights or anything like that. I have a lot of clients who, as part of the choice of where they're going to open a business or, where they're going to relocate employees, that's one of the considerations is how friendly is that country to, same-sex relationships. And, sometimes folks opt to go, as you said, there's countries in Europe, there's Canada that have had marriage equality longer than we did, are considered to be a little bit friendlier. Maybe the political climate isn't as uncertain. So it is certainly a consideration. Again, just in my personal life, I have friends who are long term moving out of the U.S. and moving to a different country just because they feel like there'll be a little bit more consistency there. They can raise their family there as a same sex couple, and it will be kind of a little bit easier for them. So it's certainly there's a lot of work to be done here in the U.S. Again, we're certainly better than a lot of other places out there, but we're certainly not at kind of the top of the list as far as LGBTQI equality goes. And whenever there's progress like marriage equality, there's always, or maybe not always, but there's often pushback. There's a reaction to that, and that reaction can really drag progress back, which unfortunately seems to be happening right now.
What do you think, Jen, on the
Yeah,
policies? Yeah, go ahead.
I think certainly Europe and Canada came to mind when you said that. I was recently in Argentina. Argentina has, I think, is extremely progressive. Buenos Aires is one of the most progressive South American countries. And so, I mean, even for me personally, traveling, I look up the law before I go there. I mean, and I'm like, can I hold my spouse's hand in this country? So I can only imagine, kind of what it's like for someone in places where they don't have those rights, and coming here because there. I think you're right, Dmitri. I think we're going through a period of, in some places, very extreme pushback, and kind of the complete opposite of inclusive, the complete opposite of people wanting equality. But yeah, I think Europe and Canada have always been way ahead of us in a lot of different interesting ways, but certainly with gay rights. Um, and I do want to plug really quick that we have this awesome global team also here at Envoy and CIP, who can help with with outgoing immigration, right? Dimitri and I do mostly US based immigration, but we do have a whole team who can help with people who do want to emigrate to other countries as well.
So Jen and Dimitri, is we approach the almost the conclusion of what we've been talking about today. Curious, can you share some resources for us and listeners just to learn more?
Yeah, I can share a few, Jen, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So
go
the
ahead.
LGBTQ center in your town, wherever you're listening in, is a great resource. They can, when I was a long time ago a newly fledged young gay person trying to find my way, I actually went to my local LGBTQ center and had there was like a little meetup group, and they would put you in touch with folks, but just as kind of a source of information. I think it's really, really helpful. Practically from like an immigration, for example, perspective, then, maybe I'm biased, but definitely talk to an attorney if you are contemplating, relocating with your spouse, same-sex spouse and your kids. Adoption, of course, is another kind of big hot topic that does come up among my clients. And it's something that you definitely want to talk to an immigration attorney about if you're adopting folks from outside of, or children from outside of the U.S. So definitely reaching out to an attorney is kind of a good resource. Just getting plugged, as I said, getting plugged in with local nonprofits in your area who are working with folks at risk, I think is a great way both to give back and to learn a little bit more about the community and kind of ways in which you can help. It's obviously has been on the news. There's a lot of really alarming things happening in Florida, for example, and not to call them out, but it's been a lot of kind of negative legislation coming out of it. But not only, I mean, we've even had in California, where I'm at, it's a pretty progressive state. There's also anti-drug, anti-trans legislation happening at kind of the local level, and it's being defeated for now. But it's a scary things. Just getting educated about that, getting involved, I think is a great way for you both to kind of give back and both to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I echo all of that. I also think be careful where you're getting your information. There is a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding. Um, especially when we're talking about kind of trending topics like the anti-drag or anti-trans movements. And like, I think a lot of people assume that people have rights that they don't have. And there's still a lot of rights we don't have as gay people as well. But I think because I've worked with them, Immigration Equality, I always kind of put a little plug in for them because they're this amazing kind of organization that does exactly this. They work with the gay population, LGBTQ population, and immigration. That's what they do. They're based out of New York, and what they do is they help try to find pro bono services in whatever state their clients are from. But they're also just a wealth of really great information about the law, like factual information, and a place where people can go and kind of look to see like, what does this mean? What does it mean to get asylum? What does it mean to be a refugee? How do you get through those systems? But absolutely seek out legal assistance when you're dealing with any immigration issue because it's so complicated. Immigration is a difficult system. There's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, but there's also a lot of unspoken rules and regulations that you just have to kind of understand from being in the business and from doing this for a while. So, but always be careful where you're getting your information from.
Definitely echo that. But Jen and Dmitri, thank you so much for sharing those resources. Really appreciate it. Jen, I have to ask before I forget, can you tell us about your background? I think our listeners will love to love to learn more about some of those images that we see behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I, we travel quite a bit. And they're all photographs that we've taken from places around the world. So this is my home office, and I was like, if someone has to stare at me, they're gonna have to stare at my photographs. So I think the one right above from Antarctica, I was just in Antarctica a few months ago, and there's a couple more from Africa, that you can see kind of in the visuals. So, but
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Jen and Dmitri, as we look to wrap things up, where can our listeners find you? Are you going to be at any events coming up that maybe listeners can come and speak with you?
I will actually be at an Envoy event in a couple of weeks. What is it? Maybe next week, but I think it's in Boston.
Mm.
But I think you can find us anytime on the Corporate Immigration Partners website. Our information is there, our bios are there, our emails are there. You can always reach out via email. But I think I don't want to speak for you, Dimitri, but I think we have an amazing group of attorneys, a wealth of information, a very progressive group of attorneys, which is so cool and refreshing. So yeah, you can always find us on CIP's website.
Yeah. As said, always welcome questions, reach out. Always happy to help. As I said, we do business immigration, but also family immigration. And if not, if you have a question I can help with, I have been doing this for a while. I have a network of folks I can refer you to for any help. So we always welcome folks reaching out.
Nice. And Dmitri, you are going on a trip pretty soon.
Can
you tell us a little bit more?
A little bit of a milestone, Eric. Thank you for asking. I have dealt with my own set of immigration challenges in the past. I was going to law school and getting notices from the immigration court at the same time, which was a little stressful. So it took a little while for my immigration situation to resolve itself, but it did, which was very exciting. And so that means I can travel internationally, and I'm going on my first international trip, actually to Israel, where I'm from, and where I last was when I was 15. So really nice to see family, friends, go back for a visit. So excited about that upcoming international trip. Just a quick glimpse of how life-changing resolving an immigration journey could be. It's, there's this weight on your shoulders when things are not quite going the way they're supposed to go. And, you don't, maybe you go about your day, you do kind of everything you typically do, but there's always this little weight of, what's going to happen to me tomorrow. I can't quite relax into my life, even though I've been, living in here since I was 15. And having that kind of reaching a resolution is life-changing. So yeah, a long answer to your question. Going to Israel next week.
Awesome. That's great. Well, Jen and Dmitri, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode. We really appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on, and thank you so much.
Thank you both. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for letting us chat a little bit.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Hey, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone.